Well, he told a dying man, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Hours later, he said it was finished, and then the silence lasted 3 days. Both of those statements are in your Bible. Well, both of them need each other to make sense. Friday afternoon outside the walls of Jerusalem. The sky has gone dark in the middle of the day. A Roman centurion stands at the foot of a cross. Watching, 3 men are dying. The one in the middle has been there since 9 in the morning. Around 3 in the afternoon, he lifts his head and shouts. Not a whisper, a shout. It is finished. One breath, then silence. The centurion says something no Roman soldier had ever said about a crucified man. Surely this man was the Son of God. The body of Jesus is taken down. Wrapped in linen, placed in a borrowed tomb, a stone is rolled across the entrance. Guards are posted, and for 3 days nothing, no miracles, no announcements. No one approaching the tomb until Sunday. Just a sealed stone and a city that continues its Passover as if nothing has changed. Here is the question almost nobody asks. Where did he go? The body was in the tomb. You know that. But the body is not the whole person. And Jesus himself had already told someone hours before he died that today, that same Friday, they would be together somewhere else, in paradise. So the body is in the tomb, and Jesus is in paradise. But there is a third piece, one verse tucked into the back of Peter's first letter that has kept serious Bible readers awake for 2,000 years. Peter writes that after Jesus died, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. 3 words, imprisoned spirits. We will come back to those, but not yet. First, you need to understand how the people in that story thought about death. Because the map they carried in their minds, the map of what happens when you die, is almost nothing like the one most of us were handed. And without that map, the 3 days make no sense at all. Picture the thief. He has been on his cross since morning, same as Jesus. He has heard the crowds mock the man beside him. He has heard the other criminal join in, and then something stops him. Maybe it is the prayer, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." Maybe it is something in Jesus's face. Something that does not look like a man losing, for whatever reason. The thief turns his head. "Remember me," he says, "when you come into your kingdom. Not save me, not take me with you, not I repent of everything I have ever done. Just remember me when you get there, wherever there is." And Jesus says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Today, not at the final resurrection, not eventually. Today the word Jesus uses is paradisos. Borrowed from Persian, it means a walled garden, a royal enclosure where the king walks in the evening. The Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. The version most of Jesus's audience knew uses paradisos for the Garden of Eden. The rabbis of Jesus's day used it for where the righteous dead waited. Not heaven in its final form, the waiting room. A good waiting room, light, peace, the presence of the righteous but waiting for something that had not yet happened. So when Jesus says, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he is saying, today you will be where Abraham is, where the prophets are, in the good side of what the scriptures call Sheol. We'll now hold that word. Sheol is not hell, not exactly. In the Hebrew Bible, Sheol is where everybody goes, righteous and wicked, the king and the servant. It is the realm of the dead. The underworld. When New Testament writers quote Psalm 16, "You will not abandon my soul to Hades," that is the Greek word they use. Not Gehenna, the lake of final fire, Hades, the holding place. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian who wrote for Roman readers, describes Hades as divided into 2 chambers, one side of light and comfort for the righteous, one side of darkness and judgment for the wicked. A great distance between them, no crossing over. Jesus himself draws exactly this picture in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus at Abraham's side, the rich man in torment, a fixed divide. Voices could cross it, people could not. That is the map. That is what first-century Jews understood death to look like. That is the geography the thief on the cross was working from. And when Jesus said paradise, He knew exactly where Jesus meant. Stay with me, because this is where Peter changes everything. Peter writes his first letter from Rome, around 62 or 63 AD. He is an old man by then, perhaps 65, perhaps older. Nero has already started burning Christians as torches for his garden parties. Peter knows what is coming. Tradition says he will be crucified within 2 years of writing these words upside down, because he told them he was not worthy to die the same way as his Lord. He is writing to scattered believers across what is now northern Turkey. People losing their livelihoods. People whose neighbors report them to Roman authorities. People who have started to wonder if following a crucified God is the most foolish thing they have ever done. And in the middle of this letter, Peter writes something so dense that scholars have been arguing about it since the 2nd century. He writes that Christ was put to death in the body but made alive in the spirit. And in that spirit, between death and resurrection, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits who disobeyed long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah. Read it slowly. Between death and resurrection, he went somewhere. He proclaimed something to spirits, imprisoned spirits, specifically connected by Peter to the days of Noah. The flood. The people who watched a man build a boat for 120 years and refused to believe the rain would ever come. There is one word in that verse that unlocks the whole passage. The Greek word translated proclaimed is kerusso, not euangelizo, the word for preaching the gospel, extending an invitation, offering good news. Kerusso is what a herald does in the ancient world. When a king won a decisive battle, he sent a herald into the conquered territory. The herald did not negotiate. He did not invite anyone to reconsider. He announced, "The battle is over. The king has won. Your side lost." That is kerusso, a declaration of accomplished victory, not an offer, a proclamation of something already decided. Here is what you should be asking now. Ephesians 4 verse 9 says the phrase "he ascended" implies he also descended to the lower earthly regions. Paul is building an argument that Christ now fills the entire range of existence above and below. He descended, he ascended, he fills all. Was that descent just a body lying in a tomb? Or was it something else entirely? We will get there. But sit with the question first. Because what the earliest Christians believed about this is the part modern Christianity largely forgot. If you are still here, I want to say something directly to you. This is not easy material. This is the kind of passage that makes careful people uncomfortable because it asks you to hold things you were never taught in a Sunday school classroom. That discomfort is not a warning sign. It is what genuine engagement with difficult scripture actually feels like. The people who wrote these letters were not afraid of the hard questions. They were writing from prison, from exile, from 1 year away from execution. Stay with me. What I am about to show you from the text itself and from men who personally knew the apostles is the part most people never reach. And it changes how you understand not just those 3 days. It changes how you understand your own. Let me show you what the earliest Christians believed, because they were much closer to these events than you or I will ever be. And they were not vague about it. Ignatius of Antioch was the bishop of Syria. He was a personal disciple of John, the apostle, the same John who ran to the empty tomb on Sunday morning. The same John who stood at the foot of the cross on Friday. Ignatius was martyred in Rome around 108 AD, fed to wild animals in the arena under Emperor Trajan. He writes from memory, from proximity, from a faith that was about to cost him his life. A man like that does not write carelessly. In his letter to the Trallians, Ignatius writes, "He descended into Hades alone, but he ascended accompanied by a multitude." Not alone, accompanied by a multitude. The Apostles' Creed, one of the oldest confessions of Christian faith, developed through the 2nd century, includes this line, "He descended into hell." The Latin is descendit ad inferos, literally, He went down to those below, not Gehenna, the final lake of fire, ad inferos to the lower regions, to Hades, the place of the waiting dead. The early church was not embarrassed. By this they put it in the creed. Now here are the three serious positions on what 1 Peter 3. Verse 19 actually means. All three have been held by careful Bible-believing scholars. I am not going to pretend one is obviously correct, but I will show you what the text rules out. Position 1. Jesus descended and preached the gospel to the souls of Noah's generation. A second chance for the people who rejected Noah's preaching. This reading is old parts of the Eastern Orthodox tradition have held it, and it takes God's mercy seriously. But here is the problem. Peter uses kerusso, the herald's word, not euangelizo, the gospel invitation. The text does not support a second chance offer. It supports a victory declaration. Position 1 cannot survive the Greek. Position 2, the imprisoned spirits are not human souls at all. They are fallen angels, specifically the sons of God in Genesis 6, the ones who came to earth before the flood, took human wives, and produced the Nephilim. Peter references these same figures directly. 2 chapters later, in 2 Peter, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into Tartarus, binding them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Tartarus, not Hades. The lowest level, the holding place for the worst of the fallen. On this reading, between death and resurrection, Jesus descended past Hades all the way to Tartarus. And he announced to those imprisoned powers that may have believed Friday afternoon was their victory, that they were wrong. He walked into their prison and told them, "You lost." Position 3 is Augustine's reading, and the most common in the Western Church. The Spirit of Christ spoke through Noah while those people were still alive. The imprisoned spirits are people now held in death who once heard the Spirit working through Noah's 120 years of preaching. This avoids the theological complexity of a post-death proclamation. But it requires some grammatical stretching of what Peter actually wrote. Here is what all three positions share. None of them describe 3 days of passive waiting. Not one. Every serious reading of the New Testament evidence 1 Peter, Ephesians 4, Revelation 1, Matthew 27 points to action. Active descent. Active proclamation. Active conquest. In Revelation 1, verse 18, is the clearest passage of all. This is the risen Jesus speaking. He says, "I was dead, and look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades." Keys, not borrowed, not received as a gift, held. Present tense. He holds them now because he went somewhere and took them. Someone had those keys before the cross. He went to where they were kept. He came back with them in his hand. Now look at what Matthew records happening at the exact moment Jesus dies. Not Sunday, not Saturday. Friday afternoon, the moment he breathes his last. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. The tombs broke open on Friday. The moment the keys changed hands, the doors began to move. Here is what most people miss. Matthew is not recording a random miracle disconnected from everything else. He is recording the first visible evidence of what Ignatius would write 50 years later. Descended alone, ascended with a multitude. The 3 days were not parentheses. They were a campaign. If this is landing for you, stay with me. What comes next is the reason I made this video. Let me bring the threads together. You have been carrying 3 open questions since the beginning of this video. The first, who are the imprisoned spirits, and what does proclaimed actually mean? The second, was the descent in Ephesians 4 active or just a body lying in a tomb? The third, if it was finished on the cross, what was left to do in 3 days of silence? Here is how they answer each other. Caruso resolves the first question. Whatever the imprisoned spirits were fallen powers, waiting souls, Both the proclamation was not an offer. It was an announcement of accomplished fact. The cross happened. The debt was paid. Tetelestai, the Greek word Jesus, shouts from the cross. Translated, "it is finished," was a word merchants stamped on a settled bill, paid in full. The payment was complete on Friday afternoon, the proclamation of that payment the announcement to every power. Every imprisoned spirit, every dark corner of existence that went out in the silence that followed. Ephesians 4 resolves the second question. He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens, in order to fill the whole universe. That is not a description of a body lying still in a tomb. That is a description of a range from the lowest depth to the highest height now fully occupied. He has been to every room. He walked every level. From Tartarus to the throne, the descent was real. The filling is complete. You are not in a universe where some territory is still unclaimed. The third question, if it was finished, what was left, carries the most weight. Payment and conquest are not the same thing. A war can be decided by a single battle. The decisive moment happens, and the outcome is no longer in doubt. But a general still rides through the territory, not to refight it, not because the victory needs to be earned again, but because conquest has to be walked. The victor has to be present in what was won. The cross was the decisive battle. Sin and death were defeated there. Nothing was missing from the payment. Nothing. The 3 days were the ride through the territory. And Ignatius knew it. Descended alone, ascended with a multitude. Now here is where this lands for you. Think about the disciples on Saturday. Not Friday. Friday was devastating. But Friday had a shape. A prophet executed by an empire. Terrible. But a shape they could hold in their minds. Saturday was different. Saturday was the day after the end. The day the story was over, and no one knew where to go. John tells you they were behind locked doors. Afraid. They had been told about the resurrection Jesus had told them, more than once, and they still did not understand it. Because you cannot understand a resurrection you have never seen from the inside. Saturday was the day they had nothing. You know that day, not the sharp grief of a fresh Friday. Not yet the morning of a Sunday you can barely believe, but the middle day, the day. The silence is so loud you start to wonder if it is an answer. A marriage that came apart and you still live in the same city. A prayer you have carried for 3 years with nothing you can point to. A diagnosis that reshaped the future you had planned. A child who made choices you cannot make for them. A faith that used to feel like solid ground and now just feels like effort. You know what Saturday feels like. You know how long it is. How quiet it gets at 3 in the morning. Here is what those 3 days say to your Saturday. It was not empty. It only looked empty. On the most silent day in human history, the day the creator of the universe was dead in a borrowed tomb. Sealed behind stone, guarded by soldiers, something was happening that no eye could follow. Proclamations were going out. Keys were changing hands. The ground from Tartarus to paradise was being walked, claimed, filled, and a multitude was being gathered that would come out of the tombs days later and walk through the streets of Jerusalem, visible to many people who knew their faces. The silence was not absence. It was occupation. You are not in an empty silence. You are in a Saturday that has a Sunday on the other side of it. You cannot see it from where you are standing. Neither could they. But the keys are not with death anymore. They have been somewhere else since Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. 3 things to carry with you. First, the Bible does not leave those 3 days blank. From Peter to Paul to Matthew to the revelation of John, multiple writers, different angles, the same testimony. Something happened between death and resurrection. The descent was real. The proclamation was real. The keys changed hands. Christian faith has never been built on a passive Saturday. Second, Caruso. The herald's announcement means the result of those 3 days is not in question. Every power that exists has already received the declaration. not an invitation. A proclamation. The king won. That announcement went out before Sunday morning, before the women reached the tomb, before Peter and John started running. It went out in the silence, into the lowest places, and it has never been recalled. Third, you may be living in a Saturday right now, sitting behind a locked door, not sure Sunday is coming. These 3 days are the answer to your Saturday, not a theological position, not a doctrinal argument, but a true thing that happened in a real place, in a silence that appeared empty and was not. He was not waiting in that tomb. He was working. He is not waiting now. Which part of this landed hardest for you, the Caruso Declaration, the Saturday you might be living in right now, or Ignatius's line? Descended alone, ascended with a multitude. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. He holds the keys of death and Hades. Well, he did not borrow them. He did not find them unguarded. He went to where they were kept, and he took them. And that changes everything.